there's a famous moment where he was on Sway and Sway was asking him, like, why don't you do this on your own?
Or why don't you empower yourself and don't need them and do it yourself?
How, Sway?
Take a few steps back to go.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers.
And so the funny part is, like, a week later, we were in Germany at our home office at Adidas in the headquarters over there, because that's where the materials library was. And he walked in and he turned to me and goes, see, these are the answers Sway does not have. And so, it was like an epic memory. Definitely will be in the book someday, if there's ever, not that there will be a book.
Being an entrepreneur comes down to being a rebel, challenging the status quo, resisting conventional paths to success, and taking the road less traveled. But what does it mean to be a rebel? How do they think, act? How do they learn? And when did they realize they were doing their life's work? In this series, I sit down with inspiring entrepreneurs, founders, and makers to hear their stories about building their business from the ground up. This is the life of a rebel. Hey everyone, Harley here for another episode of The Life of a Rebel. And today I have the great pleasure and privilege to interview someone who I've gotten to know really, really well over the last couple of months. I've known him for years and have admired his work from afar. But today with me on the show, I have Jon Wexler, who I usually refer to as Wex. Wex, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you. This is quite an honor.
It's really fun to have you. You and I met, 5 or 6 years ago or so. You were, of course, working on Yeezy with Kanye and trying to get that to be what is now, one of the greatest stories of brand building on the planet. But I actually want to start well before Yeezy and Kanye and all that. I want to ask you, when was the first moment, that first thing that happened when you knew that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? When, did you have a first business? Was there a first memory of witnessing entrepreneurship?
I remember caddying as a kid and what a great feeling it was to be self-sufficient. And I think that's when I caught the bug. It was like getting those $16 single bag, and then I was able to double bag, and then I was able to do that twice a Sunday, and then started going from Thursday through Sunday. And I remember that first summer, I was maybe 12 years old, and I had a couple $1,000 by the end of the summer. And that's when I got a bank account, all that stuff. So for me, it was kind of like just getting that first taste of earning my own keep and not being dependent on others. And I think that was something that always resonated with me. Yeah,
it's almost like the independence that, hey, I can use this thing, this tool, this vehicle to seek out independence for myself.
Yeah, and the freedom that made me feel, it enabled me to buy my first DJ equipment that then became the thing that I did to sort of create some form of income. It didn't really kick in until college, but my freshman and sophomore year, I was DJing parties every Thursday through Sunday and making, at that point in time, like $250 a night, which was crazy money to be making in the early 90s, DJing frat parties and bars around Madison, Wisconsin.
It's amazing. So you and I share that. I was a DJ too, as you know, and you and I have talked about that. But actually, I think for me, DJing was more about the business and less about the actual art of DJing. I remember finding out that although the sort of the club scene, the party scene was really cool, that actually the Jewish bar mitzvah market was incredibly lucrative. And so, I had no pride in creativity or any type of, I wasn't a purist about it. I'm like, I'm going to go do those because that is more lucrative.
Well, that's a big opportunity missed considering where I grew up.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
There, but in college in Madison, there weren't as many bar mitzvahs, but man, mazel tov.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. So I want to talk a bit about, your upbringing and you and I have talked a bit about your parents and you've had, your parents had, these sort of traditional, pretty stable jobs. And oftentimes, certainly for me, we were often influenced by our parents. Did you feel that there was any pushback from your parents? Did they feel judgment, or did you feel judgment from them when you decided to, become a DJ, or you want to sort of go into, I guess, a cooler industry, but may have not been as secure?
Well, it's funny you asked that because there was definitely more of a feeling that I was quitting doing something, that I was starting doing another thing. And It might have just been how I delivered the initial, I'm not going to play basketball anymore. I want to really focus on DJing, which in my household, growing up as the younger brother of this prolific high school basketball player who played in college and beyond, that was kind of a real curveball. So there was definitely a bit of pushback early and then throughout, to the point where I had graduated from University of Wisconsin, and my wife and I were now living in Portland, Oregon. It's 1997. And I still have the letter, but my dad wrote me this letter, and it was the most eloquent version of a swift kick in the butt that I needed to really get focused. And his whole argument to me was, you can no longer be this passive twig on a stream. I raised you to be a shepherd, not one of the sheep. And it really, at the time, I was like, I vividly remember being angry about it. But now when I look back at it, I realize it was the perfect message at the perfect time, and it's exactly what I needed. And it, while I might not have realized at the time, it's what got me back into art school, which eventually led to opening up a career with Adidas, and that, led to great things, including this. So I, definitely the pushback, but the pushback wasn't, I guess it was more constructive criticism. I definitely remember a few convos where I was referring to things as resourcefulness, where my parents definitely had a different point of view on it, and thought it was a waste of time. So I was like, no, I'm making these things work by combining these different worlds.
I want to talk through a little bit about what happened after that. How do you go from art school to Adidas, and how did that whole thing happen? Well, the whole thing was I was an independent sales rep for some young men's brands that basically were called the streetwear category, is what we refer to today. And to be successful in that world, you always had, a very entrepreneurial career, in that you had to merchandise a bunch of different brands and know who was cresting and who was about to fall off. Because in actuality, you make the most money in that pioneering space with brands that are falling off, because that's when you're going commercial with them. And my wife and I got married and decided we wanted to have kids and a little more stability in life. And so I realized that living in Portland, Oregon, moving from the Midwest, where I had a very large territory, basically I capped my earning potential by moving off the grid into the Pacific Northwest, where there were very few people to go sell. And so I started looking at the brands in the area, which were obviously Adidas, Nike, and various people in the tech space as well. Columbia Sportswear was also out here. And early on, with the rejection I was getting, I realized that I just didn't speak their language and the vernacular of their industry, even though I was on the sales side of selling apparel. And I had a couple of different footwear brands, more in like the Doc Martens lane, not sneakers. But I just realized I needed to learn the vernacular. So I went to art school, and they had a high level of placement, Art Institute of Portland, at the various brands I wanted to work at. And by my sophomore year, I had picked up enough of the language to be able to go into those interview settings and speak. And fortunately, ironically rather, I got this incredible offer at Adidas to work in their product creation team on basketball, which is a huge passion point for me growing up. And then Nike, who had also sent me various rejection letters, throughout that course of interviewing over those 3 years with them and Adidas, offered me an opportunity to work in their materials library, which, was due to my experience at the Art Institute, where I was taking design and draping, sewing, learning how to actually make, cut, and sew pieces, not just sell them. And, the Adidas job was just way more to my passion. And it wasn't like an either or, it was like an offer and a request to come back in for more and more exploration. But sure, basketball and working with athletes and creators in that space was a no-brainer. I mean, it's just a dream job. So what year did you start at Adidas?
I started at Adidas in 2000, and I worked in basketball footwear in a job called sweeper. So the person who just mops up all the loose ends, picks up all the pieces. Your job was you said custodian earlier, and I thought of that job, because it was basically washing the glasses, cleaning the floors, doing the spreadsheets, ordering the samples, making sure the business worked so that the leader of the business could go drive that business with senior leadership.
Is there a particular time inside of Adidas where, you feel like, okay, they finally realize that you have the potential to go do big things? Was there a moment that you remember that you're like, okay, they finally have figured out how to get the most amount of value from Jon Wexler?
I was fortunate enough to always have leaders who I reported into, or when I did, even in that first role, I didn't have a boss. I had a boss, but he was kind of overseeing multiple people, and there was a slot between us. Mm-hmm. So it gave me exposure to broader higher level leaders within the org. So I was lucky with that. But everything that happened over there, I mean, even that next job from that sweeper job, it was open. And I went to my boss at the time and was like, is there a reason that you're not coming to me for this? This seems like a perfect role for me. Are you guys telling me something? And he was like, no, by all means, if you think you're the right fit, go ahead and apply. And that was kind of the nature of my experience there, was sort of either seeing a real opportunity that was available or creating one by identifying a problem that there was a solution for. And the reality is the role that I played that people are most aware of at Adidas around this entertainment and influencer marketing piece back in 2009 when we started this thing was a result of one of those situations where I just pointed out a white space. I never thought it was going to be what I was going to do for a living. Right. It was just like, hey, there's a problem that we could address with this non-athlete community and really create a point of difference for the brand. We should do more of that. And my boss at the time, she was an amazing person, or is an amazing person still. But at the time, she was like, yeah, I agree. That's a really good opportunity. And then it kind of just became my job. It wasn't like I said, I want to do this. It was just like, here's a plan. Hope we can.
At this point, the majority of the sort of the collision between influencer and celebrity and brand, it was really limited to athletes at this point, right?
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
Was there a permission for you to step outside of that normal rubric of, yeah, we can create the next Jordan brand. We can connect, we can create a brand around a soccer player. How do you go from those type of discussions to, hey, wait a second, maybe we can take people that are not athletes, but also create a brand together with them?
Well, authenticity is always the key thing with the community. And so I just identified the fact that there was two things happening simultaneously. One was what you just spoke to, which the reason why athletes were the business model is because NBC, ABC, CBS, there was basically 4 networks and ESPN and then Fox. So athletes were the only thing because that's what we were always trained to look at as the only thing.
They were on TV. They were always on TV.
Always. Yeah. So then social media blossomed and that convo started splintering. And then the people that were sort of the gatekeepers of those convos turned out to be different than the celebrities that had been created by that media construct. And so, while that's happening, we recognize, or our team recognized that, and the people that I was working with really closely. And then also we pointed to the sort of authenticity of Adidas with Run DMC and the fact that the Superstar was still one of their most iconic products.
And that wasn't an athlete, that was an iconic hip hop group.
It was that kind of kick. They helped transcend it. It was athlete at first, but they were the reason it transcended because they made that song and really merged sports and music forever. And that's when it became that notion of all basketball players want to be rappers and all rappers want to be basketball players. But the greatest thing about all that is now all those people want to be entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs.
A couple years ago, you gave a TED Talk. And the TED Talk, I think, was so interesting because it was all about giving yourself permission to fail. And I think that the fear of failure is probably one of the biggest inhibitors that prevents aspiring entrepreneurs and creatives from getting started. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. I mean, would you say that mentality is one of the things that made you so successful at Adidas and beyond? I mean, why did you decide to give a talk around the idea of permission to fail, which is something we all feel, but most people don't really talk about it?
I've always found that leaders who show their vulnerability to people and kind of put their heart out there for other people to help them, protect, has always been the way to pull people in further. And that sharing that is like a really critical piece of being human. And so I just felt like that's who I was. And I'll never forget when I did like my dry run with the guys at TED. They said, all right, we're either going to put you first or we're going to have to put you after someone really sad because yours is slightly funny. And we want to make sure that it's either going to kick off the day or like bring people back off after, one of the sad ones. Unfortunately, they put me in the leadoff spot. So it was a great experience. But yeah, that fear of failure is definitely, whenever you talk to these prolific creators, they're like, no one's going to see the first thing you do anyway. Like, just give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, you just put it away. But if it does, think about what it could become. And, whether you're at DidCon or BeautyCon or any of those places, that's typically the consensus that you get from the people who are in the leadership roles there.
What do you think the future of commerce and celebrity and influence and brand are when they collide?
Yeah, I mean, creators are, that point of, even with the people we're working with, they have a louder megaphone than any brand. And, going back into that topic about distribution, the other thing that Kanye was lacking was resources. And there's one funny story, there's a famous moment where he was on Sway and Sway was asking him, like, why don't you do this on your own?
Or why don't you empower yourself and don't need them and do it yourself?
How, Sway?
Take a few steps back to go.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers.
And so the funny part is, like, a week later, we were in Germany at our home office at Adidas in the headquarters over there, because that's where the materials library was. And he walked in and he turned to me, he goes, see, these are the answers Sway does not have. And so, it was like an epic memory. Definitely will be in the book someday, if there's ever, not that there will be a book. But anyway, I think that it's like the idea that we can unlock this world of resources for people that otherwise are just out of arm's reach. And when you're a creator, you don't want to have to play the role of CEO, CFO, sourcing, all those different arms and legs that are vital to starting a business, which is real fucking work, as you know, and everyone knows that is a Shopify merchant. So, there's more than the idea and this piece. And most people cannot fill in the various building blocks to get there. And so, to me, that's the future, is by unlocking that part of this process through relationships and introductions and various other tactics. We can help people springboard into their future. I think that there's a whole world ahead of us where these creators who have basically, they are brands. If all they're lacking is that thing to offer people as an access point to them. Right. They've established their credibility. They have people checking on them daily for their perspectives. There's a quality and consistency to what they deliver. And they've probably been showcasing other people's products
their whole
to
life,
help those things to rise to prominence and then help those brands sell. And it's like, would you like to actually be that?
What would you say to people who are watching this right now, who are not celebrities, but still want to create and build their own product and their own brand? Is there something that I'm sure you get asked this all the time? I want to, people probably say, I want to build the next Yeezy brand, or I want to build the next Adidas. What should I do? What's the advice you give to people like that?
The interesting time we're in right now is that you don't really control your own narrative anymore. So it's about how you spread those breadcrumbs to get that story told by other people about you, and how you leverage the full network effect. So for me, it's about just starting with the most granular, authentic idea and building it to the fullest of its maximum version. Because when you do that, people start to recognize the inherent quality, care, craftsmanship, thought, just the story in total. Now it's not just like a generic idea. It's like, Cynthia Liu from Cactus Plant Flea Market just designed Kid Cudi's most recent Man on the Moon stuff. She also did Kanye's Jesus is King merch. She is, Cactus Plant Flea Market, most prolific brand, one of the most important brands right now in streetwear, influentially. And, they could have all done that on their own without her, but it's like when you add those layers of storytelling to it, it just dimensionalizes it in so many different ways. So it's like you start with that authentic, I want to tell a really killer story. Here's what my narrative is. Now, how many people can I pull in who can authentically extend that into different markets?
I love that. Yeah.
Because marketing is the biggest issue that I think people get confronted with.
I once heard you say something to me, one of our sessions. I can't remember if it was before you came to Shopify or since, but you said materials fray over time, and formats, they change and they shift, and products expire, but ideas remain. And what I love about that is when you think about building brand and the future of brands, you seem to always think about this sort of long-term, almost this timeliness, this timeless version of what a brand does and how it evolves over time. And it got me really excited about the future of brand. And I'm curious to know, what are you most excited about when it comes to the future of brands?
This idea that we can help people tell more stories and tell them more deeply and provide more experiences for them, I think is what is the future of e-commerce and life in general, is this merger of online and offline and helping to bridge those universes in a way that creates a seamless story between both areas. Pokemon Go is kind of the start of that, the gamification piece, but it's going to evolve into a part of it's just normal life. And, I think about like kids who are 12 and 13 right now and what they're going to experience, in the future. And I'm convinced that my kids, and maybe it's my kids, but they're going to say things to me like, Grandpa, you mean you used to wear the same clothes as everyone else? You mean everyone bought the same brands at a store? Like the experience and the way that people are going to relate with what brands are today is going to completely transform probably in the next 10 years. With the ability to print and all those things that are happening right now. So I just think that like the way technology and the offline world are going to combine is going to, we might actually get the world the Jetsons promised us here.
Yeah. What inspired you to make the jump from sneakers and streetwear to Shopify?
I witnessed how, like, from my own experience and the personal freedom I felt and having some money in my pocket as a 11, 12-year-old, to witnessing the worlds that were unlocked through the businesses that we were able to build, with Kanye and Beyonce, or really Kanye, Pharrell, and other people. The Beyonce business is really starting to kick in since I've left. But I want to help more people do that. For me, it's about that feeling when people get that first spark of creativity and helping them marry that up with the capabilities to unleash that to the world and tell those stories. Like that was the real critical piece about the past, was working with these apex storytellers, like the pinnacle. And, that's what people are really buying, is the story that those people are sharing with them. So for me, it was like the ability to marry up this idea that Shopify is this incredible platform that offers all these, whether you're in your garage or you're in Calabasas, or sometimes in your garage in Calabasas. But yeah, the amazing open playing field and blank canvas it is for creators to come in and chart their own history and to do it in an equitable way. Yeah. I mean, that was really key to me. This idea that endorsement and those types of relationships are the way forward, for creatives. I think that the future is independent.
What you have done over the last decade or so is you have transformed what it means to be a brand and an artist and someone of influence. And you've taken this incredibly authentic, but also a very human approach to how do you manifest the Kanye West brand into products that everyone can enjoy in a way that doesn't feel promotional, that doesn't feel transactional, but feels authentic. And I'm going to close with, I only have 2 quotes in my Jon Wexler quote file. I'm going to close with a second quote because I think it's a great way to wrap this up. And it's this. What you said to me when you first started at Shopify, you said, "We are witnessing a shift from the old world of money is power to a new paradigm where culture is power." And the reason that's so important is because while money is a finite thing, culture can be created. Culture is democratized. Anyone can create culture. And I think that idea of culture is power is this freeing way. And I think it's almost the entrepreneur's credo, which is that it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, what your last name is, what your parents did. What matters is, are you creating value? Are you changing minds and are you finding ways into people's hearts? And there is no one that I know on this planet that has done that better than you. And you've inspired an entire generation of people to become creators and entrepreneurs and to share their gifts with the world. And for all of those entrepreneurs out there, I just want to say thank you.
Oh man, thank you. That's like really humbling to hear. And I know we've spoken before. I always just felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do. So it's always super awkward for me to receive these types of...
I'm not trying to make you blush. I just, someone has to say it. Someone, credit where credit is due.
I appreciate it tremendously. And, I just look forward to putting more energy out there and helping more people create culture with us. That's really the game. And thank you.
Well, thank you for being on the show. And that's The Life of a Rebel with my friend Jon Wexler. Most people know him as Wex. And we'll see y'all later.